For centuries, a profession that has been banned, celebrated, and stigmatized. The history of prostitution is more complex and shocking than you think. A profession dedicated to goddesses in Mesopotamia's sacred temples, enslaved in Rome's lupanars, and made attractive through intellectual conversations in Renaissance Italy. Prostitution has been hidden in the dark corners of societies throughout history, while also shaping them. Banned or celebrated, sacred or cursed. In this documentary, we will reveal how prostitution shaped societies from Mesopotamia to Europe, from ancient gods to modern lawmakers, overturning moral norms and surviving in the unknown corners of history. Welcome to the surprising and sensational history of the world's oldest profession. The roots of prostitution stretch back to the sacred prostitution practices dedicated to gods in Mesopotamian temples. In ancient Greece, high-class prostitutes known as hetairas dazzled with their intellectual conversations, while slaves known as pornai were forced to work in dark brothels. In Rome, brothels known as lupanar were common throughout the empire. The prostitutes at the bottom of the social ladder were stigmatized, while those considered sacred prostitutes in temples were regarded as holy. Attitudes towards prostitution have been complicated, sometimes considered sacred, sometimes cursed. From Mesopotamia's ancient temples to Rome's lupanars, prostitution was a part of societies in different ways. Sacred prostitutes called goddesses in temples were considered offerings to the gods. In ancient Greece, hetairas sold not only their bodies, but also their intellectual conversations. In the Roman Empire, brothels were known as lupanar, and services were offered at every level. The famous writer Seneca talks about the ruthless exploitation of slave prostitutes in Rome. In this period, the nickname lupa, given to prostitutes, labeled them as outcast women. In medieval Europe, prostitution was banned under the influence of the church, but this did not completely eradicate prostitution. Brothels continued to operate secretly in medieval cities. In the 16th century, famous courtigiana, courtesan prostitutes, emerged in Renaissance Italy. These highly educated, art and music-loving women were the favorites of noblemen. There were also courtigiana onesta, who catered to lower classes. By the 19th century, prostitution had become even more widespread with industrialization, and brothels appeared, especially in port cities. In London by the late 19th century, it was estimated that there were over 300 brothels just in the Soho area. Throughout the history of prostitution, societies have continuously changed their perspectives on it from moral, religious, and legal viewpoints. In the early 20th century, white slavery, a term used in America, became a major concern regarding human trafficking. In the same period, many European countries also began to enact various laws to control prostitution. However, these bans usually backfired, and prostitution exploded in the underworld. Prostitution has always faced societal stigmas and legal restrictions. In ancient Rome, prostitutes were branded and forced to wear special clothes that marked them as outcasts. In medieval Europe, prostitutes were excommunicated by the church. In 19th century London, police raids left women more vulnerable to abuse, while the 20th century White Slave Traffic Act in America targeted even innocent women. Throughout history, prostitutes have had to contend with violence, economic exploitation, forced labor, police raids, and societal exclusion. The stigmas prevented them from accessing basic human rights and drove them into dark alleys. Despite the challenges, some societies took steps to regulate prostitution and protect prostitutes. At the end of the 19th century, brothels in Paris were brought under state control. But behind this regulation policy lay a dark truth. Most of the women working in brothels were slaves forced to work against their will. In Germany, a 1927 law allowed prostitution to be regulated under certain conditions, but brothels continued to be terrorized by police raids. In the late 20th century, countries like the Netherlands and Germany decriminalized sex work. This move allowed sex workers to operate in safer working conditions, reducing exploitation rates. However, The red light district in the Netherlands, despite these regulations, became a hub for human trafficking and drug trafficking. On the other hand, the Nordic model, which advocates for the complete ban on sex work, began to be implemented in Sweden, Norway, and Ireland. This model aims to protect prostitutes by punishing the buyers of sex. However, critics argue that this model forces sex workers into even more dangerous conditions. Meanwhile, in Victoria, Australia, prostitution was decriminalized, and legal protection was provided for sex workers. But this time, the number of illegal brothels increased, undermining efforts to completely eradicate prostitution. In the United States, efforts to decriminalize sex work are still ongoing. In New York, some officials argue that laws regarding sex work need to be reorganized, while others believe this would negatively affect social morality. In California, however, the proposal to legalize sex work has been repeatedly rejected. In Turkey, prostitution is not legally considered a crime, but sex workers still struggle with social stigma and exploitation. The challenges faced by sex workers are a common problem, not only for one country, but for the entire world. The story of prostitution, the world's oldest profession, remains one of the most complex and shocking chapters in human history. Prostitution has always been a field where moral, religious, and legal perspectives collide throughout history. From Mesopotamia's sacred temples to modern decriminalization efforts, the story of prostitution, the world's oldest profession, remains an inseparable part of human history. This complex story reveals society's double standard against sex workers and their struggle to overcome the challenges they face. Although the future of prostitution is uncertain, understanding its history plays a key role in shaping societal perceptions of it. Despite different approaches to legalizing or decriminalizing sex workers around the world still have to contend with stigma, exploitation, and violence. Recognizing that prostitution persists even in the darkest corners of humanity can help us as a society show more understanding toward this profession and those who work in it. For example, in Turkey, sex workers still struggle with social stigma and exploitation. This complex story reveals humanity's most fundamental instincts and societal contradictions. The story of prostitution, the world's oldest profession, remains one of the most complex and shocking chapters in human history. Don't forget to share your thoughts on this sensational topic and subscribe to our channel for unique mysterious events, historical content, and sensational stories.